Hello everyone, welcome back to Be the Whole You. My name is Gulveg, and today we're going to be talking about this new moon in Scorpio, November 13th, 2023. So before I get into the specifics of what this new moon is doing and getting some additional information from the tarot to see how best we can leverage and respond to this energy, I want to use an analogy just to kind of set the stage for how to understand this very dualistic and somewhat complex new moon in Scorpio. So if you were to take a look at the videos from last month for the new moon and the full moon, the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse from October of 2023, you'll notice that both of those definitely had a lot of clarity. And I specifically had written down for the solar eclipse one that between the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse of last month, that it was almost like we were going to get like a cosmic blueprint, a to-do list on how to move forward. So there was clarity on what the next steps were. Whereas before, for the last, I would probably say 18 months, there's been like a sort of murkiness where we've been kind of feeling through the fog of what's next. And now we're starting to get a little bit more clear on, even if we don't know the specifics on what it is that comes next, we're getting more clear on what's important to us and what the essence is of what it is that we're moving towards. So saying that, we have this blueprint, right? And this, when I saw like what was going on with this new moon, I was like, this is just a natural part of the creation process. So let's make the analogy of like building a house, right? So last month we got our blueprints and we're like, okay, like there might be some adjustments that we might have to make when we actually start building this thing, but I have a pretty good idea of what the general gist is of what it is that we're going to do. Now with this new moon in Scorpio, we are in the site preparation, the excavation piece. And this is the piece where people start to typically get uncomfortable, whether or not it's actually building a house or any other kind of creative project, because destruction always comes before new creation. The ancient people all knew this. In fact, we have an ancient rune from the Norse that's known as Hagalaz, and it's known as the hailstone rune. And this rune specifically is associated with the part of the death and rebirth process that is part of nature and part of all of our experiences. They had a rune that specifically was about the hailstone, the destruction that comes before the creation. And even when building a house, people get uncomfortable with this part of it because like you have to uproot things. You might even have to cut down trees. You might have to dig a hole into the hillside. Like at first glance, if you didn't know what it is, like what the long-term vision was, it might look like just absolute chaos. And that's a lot of times what this part of the creative process feels like. And this is the part where a lot of people just kind of, they just call it a day and say, well, I'm not in the flow, so it must not be worth it. And that's not the case. Just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not in the flow. Sometimes the flow is rapids that we're having to navigate through in our little canoe and like going around big boulders. And sometimes the flow is a meandering, beautiful brook where we get to just sit back and just enjoy the breeze. And that's typically what we think of being in the flow is about. But there is a truth in the fact that anything worth having is usually not easy. And that is double for any kind of personal transformation. And usually to create something really that our heart really wants, not just, fanciful entertainment or distraction, but like, the fulfilling things, the big things, those things typically take an egoic death and rebirth. We have to excavate who and what we think we are in order to become more of who and what we really are. So this new moon, even though it's not the most comfortable, it is part of the process. So if you're feeling like you're not in the flow, if you're feeling uprooted, if you're feeling like you don't know really where your bearings are, if it seems like it's absolute chaos, especially if it feels that way after maybe like maybe a few weeks or even like a few days of feeling like, you know, like I think I got this. And then all of a sudden it feels like the rug got pulled out from under you. It doesn't mean that you're not in the flow. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that you're a natural being having a human experience, and that I would say that if that is the case, if you are feeling that way, then to just sit back, take a few breaths, and allow enough time to go by, even if it's uncomfortable, to really see if the discomfort is actually symbols of like ding ding ding, you're not going the right way, or if it's just the discomfort of the death and rebirth, if it's just the discomfort of laboring, of birthing something new, of in the Nordic tradition, they talk about, you know, Odin hanging on the tree for 9 days, and that's how he received the knowledge of the runes, was through this death and rebirth process. And it said in there that in that process he gave birth to himself, he rebirthed to himself. So yeah, so that is very likely what is going on right now, because Scorpio in and of itself is defined by the planet Pluto. Planet Pluto in Scorpio, that is the energy of death and rebirth. And I know that even the word death can be somewhat triggering, and at the same time it's triggering in part because culturally we don't have a very good association, we don't have a very good relationship with this part of our nature, with this part of the natural process of things. We do a very good job in the Western world of really sanitizing this part of our experience. So for example, things like grief aren't really openly talked about as much. There's not as much space held for that, even though that is very much part of that process. We even like physical, real death, like we hide away those the people who have passed on, and when it comes time to say goodbye and there's a wake, we make them look like they're just sleeping. So we do a really good job of sanitizing this part of our experience. And psychologically what this does is, I think it produces a socialized construct that also breeds us, it invites us to just oppress this part of ourselves or hide this part of ourselves when we're experiencing this messiness that comes with natural creation. So if you're feeling messy, it's okay. If you're feeling messy, it's okay to be messy, and it's okay to not be okay. And I thoroughly believe, as I'm looking at this, that this is, again, it's just part of the process, and this too shall pass. So with all of that being said, you're probably like, what the heck is this new moon doing? Like, this sounds like it's going to be pretty intense. Well, yeah, it is. And at the same time, it, for me at least, when I see these kind of like uncomfortable things, I'm just like, okay, well, then that probably means I'm not alone. And for some reason that somehow like gives salve to the wound. That gives like salve to the discomfort of like, I might be feeling messy, and you know, if the stars are affecting everybody else like they affect me, or at least there's other people who can feel these influences the way that I do, you know, I'm probably not alone in the mess. And somehow that makes it feel a little bit better. So you're not alone, my friends. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics. So new moon in Scorpio, I already talked about how the Scorpio energy in itself is like this death and rebirth process. So the sun is at 20 degrees in Scorpio, as is, of course, the moon. And then we also have Mars at 22 degrees in Scorpio. This alignment, the sun and the moon, also square Uranus, which is in retrograde, at 21 degrees in Taurus. So a square is a point of friction. And I'm going back to the runes again. Again, the ancient people did have, the Nordic ancient people did have a rune for the friction that causes the bonfire, and it's called Nauthiz. It's the friction that is required for movement. It's the friction that is required for new creation. So in this case, the analogy is like the two sticks that rub together in order to create the fire. Well, we also have to have friction to move forward. If there was no friction, then like your feet as it meets the floor would not have enough friction to move ahead. So friction is, again, one of those things that are needed to move ahead. And when we see squares, and there's typically a square in at any point in time, between the planets and the other celestial bodies, and those pieces may feel challenging, but oftentimes they also signify resistance or friction that is needed to either be transmuted or leveraged in some way in order to move forward. And that's what I see here. So Mars at 22 degrees. First of all, if we take a look at numerology, 22 is a number of the master builder. Mars is about the sacred masculine. It is, I mean, a lot of times Mars gets a little bit of a bad rep because of its associated with war, but it's also associated with vitality and passion and fire and courage and charisma. So when it is appropriately focused, it can revitalize us, and it can give us that little bit of oomph in order to have the tenacity to play the long game, to get to run the marathon versus the sprint. And that's what I'm seeing here with Mars at 22 degrees in Scorpio. Now, the flip side of that is that if we allow this ocean of emotion, this deep current of Scorpio energy to allow us to kind of, use an undertow to bring us into the depths of our emotions, and we start getting lost in that, how I say it is like we become our emotions versus having emotions. We lose any kind of objectivity in that state. If we find ourselves in that state, then Mars could actually have its shadow side present, where we start projecting and becoming like aggressive, or we start, sabotaging relationships and communications around us as our shadow side starts projecting itself all around us. So in order to avoid that, it is really important with this new moon to take a lot of time for yourself, to ask for help and resource, especially true if you have a hard time asking for help. That may just be one of the shadows that are being asked to be transmuted. And one of the helpful things that can help this is Mercury's in Sagittarius at 4 degrees. Now, even though it is not conjunct this moon at all, it's close enough with the planetary stellium that's happening there that it will have some sort of a effect. And Sagittarius is associated with Jupiter, and Jupiter expands anything it touches and also sprinkles in a little bit of luck. And number 4 is the number of foundation, and Mercury is the number of communication. So what I'm seeing here is like, as you communicate your needs, your boundaries, as you find safe spaces or individuals to be able to, share your feelings with, so that it's not just, because when we keep things inside, it takes up mental load. It takes up basically like your mental RAM that you have to deal with. So if there are things that might be shameful or guilt-ridden or fearful that we're keeping in, but we don't really want to talk about it with anyone else, or we haven't started to talk about it because we don't feel clear enough about it in order to articulate it very well, then that is a really good indication that that's exactly what it is that would be helpful to help us move forward. Because once you start articulating that, you'll notice that, typically speaking, what happens is clarity will start to present itself as you start to get it out of here and channel and sharing it in a safe way with safe people, to help process it. Once it stays inside, it's just jumbling around, and it will continue to do that, and it will cause anxiety, and it will cause, maybe depression, anger, so on and so forth. So this in energetic anatomy, Vishuddha, this is the throat chakra. Vishuddha literally means the great purifier. So that is one of the reasons why I think Mercury, because Mercury is about communication, that is one of the reasons why, and Sagittarius is also a sign in energetic anatomy that's associated with moving forward. In our body, Sagittarius is associated with the lower legs, the calves, to help us move forward. So if we can use our communication in a way to purify our experience, and what that means is asking for what it is that we need, setting our boundaries, speaking our truth, saying yes when we mean yes, no when we mean no, and finding folks, whether it be a therapist or just a close friend, that we can start to use our words. And it doesn't even have to be words, it could be artwork too. Use any mode of self-expression to be able to get out of the experience of having difficult emotions and situations and past wounds and traumas just kind of churning around inside, and we are able to channel it in some way. That will be the medicine that will take the venom and turn it into an anti-venom. And that's actually how that works, right? So like if you were bit by a poisonous snake, the anti-venom is actually made from the venom of that snake. So the poison is also the very thing that can be transmuted to make the medicine. And that's actually how personal transformation works. I think there's this very toxic thought process or belief system within the spiritual community that healing is just about like amputating, clearing shadows and wounds and traumas and difficult emotions. And then once we clear all of that, then we are more whole. And like, that's not how it works. You don't amputate this part of you that potentially actually was at one point in time a very needed coping mechanism, and this be like, oh, don't need you anymore, you know. Usually our shadows are also the very thing that gestates and germinates our gifts. And I actually wrote down a good example of this. This is something that comes up really actually quite often in my work with individuals. So like this whole for example, trust issues comes up a lot with clients that I work with, and trust issues is something that I have really had to wrangle with. And even to this day, there's certain times in which there's certain situations that come up that will trigger like, oh, wait a minute, like this is not a trustworthy situation or person. How do I respond to this? And am I projecting, or is it truth, or is it something kind of in between? Like all of that, right? So trust issues also are usually a lot of times are caused by a childhood where the caregivers were either absent or in some other way were not reliable. Either they were emotionally unavailable, they perhaps were absentee parents, and that doesn't necessarily mean they were bad parents. Like sometimes this can happen even with single family units where there's only one guardian for multiple kids and they have to go make ends meet, you know, so the kids are left essentially like fending for themselves a lot. So it's not that necessarily that we had bad parents. It can just mean that these parents were not able to meet our needs as children in some way. And then that creates a sense of distrust. Also, what can happen with that scenario though, is that a lot of these individuals, including myself, who have struggled with trust issues, also can a lot of times have very good discernment. And yet that discernment is oftentimes not fully expressed in adulthood, because healing the trust issues means first and foremost healing how we trust ourselves. So here's a really good example of how the shadow, the wound, which was, my environment and people around me are not trustworthy. I cannot rely on other people to meet me where I'm at or to meet my needs. Then I'm just going to have to like do it all on my own, that kind of thing. Those folks having really good discernment, but that gift is not expressed because then we don't even trust ourselves enough in order to trust the discernment. right? So here's a really good example of when we start healing the wound, then the gift that's actually germinated in the wound is allowed to break free. And in order to do that, there is a sort of egoic, an identity type of transformation that has to happen, because there's that part of us that we identify with that isn't able to trust in this example, that has to transform, transmute, and be willing to let go enough to be able to take incremental, healthy risks that can start to create a new story. Now, creating that new story, whether or not it's trust issues or anger issues or whatever it is that's boiling up to the top, this gestating this transformation of allowing a part of ourselves to let go enough in order to create a new story, that new story will be tested. And this again is part of that creative process. It's part of that transformation process. So a lot of times folks will give up on the transformation process as soon as it's tested, because they're like, see, it doesn't work. Changed my mindset. I've been focusing on, feeling, a particular way. I've been doing my mantras. I've been taking a look at my inner child or my shadows, and I've been, working with them and trying to have more self-compassion, been doing all the things, and yet the same circumstance, the same pattern came up in my life again. I must be doing it wrong. This shit don't work. And that's not necessarily the truth. It's the minute that, for example, I read this in a meditation book one time, and he was talking about this. And the example that this author gave was the minute a person decides to fast will be the minute that your neighbor or your friend makes you like your favorite peach pie and comes over and is like, oh, I made you this wonderful dessert and I made it with love. And that will be the minute that the universe is like, are you sure this is what you want? Are you sure you're going to do this? That is ultimately what happens. That is a sign that the story is starting to shift. It's not a sign that you're on the wrong trail. It's not a sign that you're failing or this don't work. That moment that you're tested, when you make a decision and then the universe responds with like either a temptation or an obstacle that's the opposite of what it is that you see as being helpful, that is a pivot point. That pivot point, in order for something to pivot, it has to have friction. And so that is just the moment in which the universe is checking in with you and asking you, are you sure? Are you sure? And if you can respond in alignment with what it is that your true heart's intention is versus what the old story would be, the more chances of success there is. And that is something that could definitely happen with this new moon. That whatever actions you've put in place based on the blueprint of last month of October, whatever actions or momentum you've put in place, it may be tested. It may be questioned, it may be judged, or something else may come up where you are like, well, this must mean that I'm on the wrong track. It doesn't. It doesn't necessarily mean that. In order to know whether or not it actually means that, it might take a short period of time to just let it gestate. Typically speaking, we do have a lot more time and space than we give ourselves credit for to just kind of like witness and see really what's going on. Also, something like that, it can really be helpful to turn into your own intuition if your own intuition isn't clear because of whatever emotions are coming up or whatever other thing that might be blocking it. Getting a reading on something like that can be helpful. So that might happen. Also, we're talking about this being the time where we're putting in foundations. Well, the foundations that we're putting down are going to be pretty deep. So again, this kind of comes back down to that Mars at 22 degrees squaring Uranus. Uranus is it's the planet of revolution. You could think of it as actually like the wrecking ball of the planets. So this deep Scorpio transformative energy, and it's death and rebirth, and it's conjuncting Mars at 22 degrees. And Mars is like, it's like vigor and vibe to like go and build the new thing. And then it's squaring Uranus. And that square, that friction, is us coming to awareness of what it is that Uranus is like. Here's like, okay, sure, like I'll work with Pluto energy and help you like clear away what it is that, you know, needs to be transmuted and composted in order to create something new. And then our identity is probably going to be like, yo, what? I don't know if I want to let go of that. And Uranus is like, well, you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to make a decision. Is this really what you want? Is it worth letting go of what you need to let go in order to move ahead? Is what you want worth letting go of what you had? Is what you want worth changing how you might see yourself? Or worth taking a look at deep fears and ways that we self-sabotage? Like, that's what Uranus is asking us. And because Uranus is in Taurus, it means whatever it is that is being asked to be transmuted, and the revolution that is like wanting to come up to the surface from those deep Scorpio waters, what it being in Taurus means that the transformation is going to have real, tangible, practical transformation in our everyday life. That's Taurus. Taurus is about tangible, practical, three-dimensional type of transformation. So money, home, family, friends, health, all of that. It's going to affect those kind of practical matters. So with it being all of this Scorpio energy that is being asked to, that we are channeling into in order to lay these foundations are not going to be superficial foundations. So what I'm seeing here is like big things are being asked of us. Big transformation is being asked of us. It does not necessarily mean that these big transformations are going to be like huge overt transformations where we create a new empire, or we like, you know, literally demolish our house and build a new one. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be big transformation on a practical level, but it's going to be big transformation on us on a personal level at the very least. So when, and the reason why I say that is when you have more like let's take again the example of building a house. If you're building a very small house, like, you know, like just like maybe one of those little tiny houses, you know, like a, you know, 10 by 20 foot little house, that would be like 200 square feet, right? Like really, really little house. You don't need typically a deep foundation for that. Like you could just like put down a slab of concrete and build on it. Typically speaking, unless you had like super sandy soil or something that isn't very, very solid. But if you want to build a 10-story apartment building, you're going to need deep footings. And the kind of transformation that is being asked here for us to create is really, it's very, very deep. Scorpio is like the deepest waters. And so we are excavating on a very deep subconscious level. And as we do so, and as we bring up these shadows and be like, oh, I can see the gift that's been gestating in there, but it hasn't been allowed to be break free because of the fact that I'm still keeping the shadow alive. It still hasn't been transmuted into something that's more helpful. Then once we see that, and we've excavated that, we can see, and we do that work, then in its place where we've excavated that wound, there is a very deep footing. And we can place in that footing whatever it is that we want to build. And that Mars at 22 degrees is what's going to give us the energy and the fortitude to be able to decide what it is that we are building a foundation for. What kind of foundation do I need to build? And what's coming to my mind is like the visions coming to my mind is actually like, you know, Scorpio is water. So it's almost like building stilts for a home that's being built on the water, where it's deep, it's solid, and it allows us to root deep into these very deep waters in order to rise above them. We can actually build solidarity above these deep waters, and we don't even have to be necessarily separate from them, because you can dive down into you can jump from your platform and dive down into those deep waters whenever you choose to. So it's like this new moon in a nutshell. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And so let's take a look and see. I know that this is a long one, so let's just pull a few cards here. All right, join me in just setting the intention for yourself that whatever part of this message here is that's pertinent to you and your situations is what's going to be highlighted for you individually. How best might we leverage and utilize this new moon in Scorpio energy on November 13th, 2023. All right. So for some of us, well, it's probably most of us that are watching this, this might show up in terms of how we relate to money or how we make our money. So the first card, the card that comes up is Ace of Pentacles reversed. Second card that comes up is Four of Pentacles reversed. And then we have the Sun card again reversed. And by the way, the Sun card reversed, it's not even in its reversal, it's not a bad card. So there might be something that we had either hoped or dreamed, and it's either going to be harder than we thought it was going to be, or perhaps it's even coming to a halt, like something that we would like to create, probably something more tangible, like a career change, starting a business, or creating some other kind of income stream, maybe a way that we wanted to invest our money. That is like, it's either pausing or there's some sort of resistance to it that we're going to find. Now, the Four of Pentacles is all about foundation, ironically. We've been talking about foundation this whole time. And so this pause that we see here as far as like this tangible forward ahead, and the other thing that that's coming to me is like, this could also be like something like physical too, where like it's more like on a health level where we took strides to heal something, to manage something, and like either the old way that we were managing it or the resource that we thought was going to be there is no longer there. Or it's not as complete as we had thought it would be. The support that we had is not complete as we thought it would be. So this is going to create some fear around what is our foundation? What can we anchor into? What can we trust? The Four of Pentacles is all about savings and creating like a foundation that's very tangible. When it's reversed, it means like there's this gripping, this hoarding, this anxiety around that. Like we're not really sure what it is that we can anchor into. And so we start trying to micromanage that ourselves. We might close ourselves off. And this is when we would usually stop communicating what it is that our hopes, dreams, aspirations, and our challenges that we're facing are, because a lot of times in this space, people will just kind of clam up and go inside. What the cards are saying is the remedy to that is the opposite, that it's really about, because one of the things about the Sun reversed is inner child healing. So you can see that there's a child on the horse and looking at the sun, and so when it's reversed, it's like we're being asked to reconnect with our essence. Our essence is parallel with the inner child, because when we are born, we are connected with our essence, and then we learn how to forget what the essence is in exchange for being more acceptable socially, certain behaviors, and from family dynamics, we give up these pieces of ourselves. So the way to heal this anxiety and this gripping and to start opening up more of the flow and perhaps additional resources and support is with internal work, is with shadow work, inner child healing, doing some of the deep work of owning even the wounds that are not our fault. They are still our responsibility to heal, simply because nobody else can heal them besides us. It may not be fair, may not necessarily be just, but it's the truth. So that's the work that we're being asked to do. And because it's the Sun card, it means that doing that work is going to, it's going to flip this card right side up, and the Sun card is success. So in some ways, this might be for some people like that last push that like a mother has to do before like she receives her beautiful new child. This might be that last mile in a marathon before, like, that seems harder than the other 29 miles before it, before you get to that finish line. All of the planets, the cards, and I'm guessing probably even your own inner knowing knows that it may not be easy, but it'll be worth it. So my heart goes out to you all. You're not alone in this. If you're feeling the strain, you're not alone. And you got this. Even if it means that you need to reach out for a resource and help, you still, like, that doesn't denote that you don't got this. It just means that you know how to resource yourself in order to have this. Like, you have got this. All right, love you all, and I look forward to seeing you back here in a couple weeks where we're going to take a look at the full moon. If you have found this video to be helpful at all, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, all of that things. Bell notification will make sure that you know immediately when we have these videos come up, and I look forward to seeing you all here in a couple weeks when we're going to take a look at what the full moon has to say. Bye-bye.